that when you've been around for 2 days, then of course not only you have people. On the first day you meet people that you already knew, then you meet new people. On the second day you have even more people that you know, and you add some more. So it's good to give time for networking over lunch, conversations, friendships are born at Ideas Lab, and so on and so forth. But we now start bringing the people back in the room because we have our last plenary. After that, we'll wrap up the official program of Ideas Lab. And as you know, we're going to have an after hours with additional other sessions, which are mostly closed doors. There's one that is open, but it's and the people that want to stay in the venue, of course, will be able to stay and continue networking or organizing impromptu flash mob types of meetings and so on and so forth. That said, we at CEPS, and I explained this already yesterday, but also in a panel that we just had on Horizon Europe, are very fond of science and research and innovation. We think that even in our tiny little world of think tanks, putting together different scientific fields and domains and doing multidisciplinary analysis is essential. That's why, as you've seen also in the foyer and other parts, we couple data science with social science, with natural sciences. We do whatever we can to keep a relationship with the scientific community as much as possible. At the moment, we are in at least 17 or 17 to 20, depending on how you count Horizon Europe projects. So we are a think tank with a deep scientific basis, and many of us are academics as well. And so we do believe that in a world in which trust in science, at least in some parts of the world, is waning, we need to do whatever we can to keep the flag of science and Europe's approach to science as high as possible. And so we also do not just recognize that Europe has excellence in science and is a leader in science around the world. We would like this leadership to spread internationally, also in the form of science diplomacy and in involving countries around the world in international collaborative projects on science, as the EU has been doing. And we will hear that for many years, but we would like that to be pushed even further. But we also would like to see the EU thriving in the future in science. And we know that the scientific enterprise, Stefan would call it, and perhaps would say something about this in this session, the scientific enterprise will fundamentally change over the years, in the next years, right? General purpose technologies, of course, everybody has things about AI, but there's others. Think about synthetic biology, think about quantum computing. We just had a session today on this. Will fundamentally change the way in which we try to address questions. But this might also give us the possibility, with data availability and a new powerful tool, to change the way in which we ask questions and we formulate our scientific research questions. So all this is the business we're in. We do believe that in the future it will be increasingly important to be able to really leverage science for societal well-being, for planetary boundaries, for better policy making and decision making. All this is basically what Ideas Lab is about, but also what Ideas Lab looks up to in terms of institutions that can really do this. It's a challenge, but it's a great question for the European Union. As you will hear, the European Union is now reflecting on science and on the Horizon Europe Framework Program in the context of the future budget of the EU. So all this, just to give you an idea of the different intertwined factors that led us to choose science for the last plenary of Horizon Europe. And we have, I'm very happy and honored to introduce the speakers that will take the floor over the coming minutes. And I will start with one, and I'm super happy I could have a conversation with her over lunch. She joined our session on Horizon Europe. And she is Italian, which is already great because I relate even more. She's an experimental particle physicist. She served for 10 years, 2 consecutive mandates as the Director General of CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research. She has also several other activities. She has a fantastic past track record in research. She's been part of the group, or leading the group, that led to the discovery of the Higgs boson. I mean, these are discoveries that change the way in which we look at life in general. And She's also a trained ballerina and a piano player. So just to go in there, so I shouldn't, we hadn't agreed that I would say this, but just because we might ask you to that, no, okay. But because sometimes the versatile intelligence and being able to mix and match many things. This is subject actually also for the future of education to a lot of debate. So I wanted to emphasize that because you don't need to be a super nerd that has done one thing in your life to succeed in life. If you've done even more things or practice different parts of your brain as well through art, through other disciplines, perhaps you are better positioned even to put something new or to put that spark of genius in the research that you unleash. Okay, enough for my words. I would be very happy to call on the stage of Ideas Lab for our plenary on science, Fabiola Gianotti. Please, Fabiola, take the floor, and we will listen to you for your initial speech. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and many thanks for having me here today on this panel, in this session. So,
there are slides that you...
yes, here we go. So, at a time when Europe often faces criticism for its weaknesses, technological dependence, or fragmentation, I think it's important to also recall some brilliant examples of European leadership in science and technology. And actually, Europe has a long-standing tradition of valuing science and curiosity-driven exploration. And today it hosts many brilliant and high-level research facilities, including, in particular, the 9 intergovernmental organizations that together form the Aeroforum Consortium. So you can see them listed here. Their research areas span from particle physics to biology and material science, and from space exploration to nuclear physics and nuclear fusion. And they cover physical scales that go from the tiniest particles, the billions of a meter, all the way to cosmic distances. So what are the core strengths, the goals and values of this European research infrastructure? Number one, they are world-class facilities. They are actually world leaders in their respective fields, so they attract a large community of researchers from all over the world, and the attractiveness and the value of a scientific facility is really measured in terms of the number of researchers that this facility manages to attract. So these are really examples of leadership. They're also drivers of innovation because they are very ambitious scientific goals that require the development and construction and operation of advanced instruments and advanced technologies. And so this brings them to innovate. They train generation of scientists, engineers, and technicians, and therefore provide society with a rich and much-needed talent pipeline in STEM. They have very strong and mutually beneficial relation with industry, and so they contribute in this way to Europe's innovation capacity. They foster an open, inclusive environment and collaboration across borders, thereby contributing to connecting people through science. And they have a huge impact on society and on European competitiveness, autonomy, and sovereignty through the knowledge they generate, the technologies that they deliver, and the people they train. Very important, they are mainly supported by public funds. And this is really crucial because long-term budget stability is absolutely essential for the construction, operation, and upgrades of projects at these facilities, many of which actually span several decades. And I would like to emphasize that, in general, one of the most crucial and distinguishing strengths of European research is the long-term stability of its funding, coming from both national contribution and the very successful EU framework programs. So CERN is probably the archetype of this role, success and values. It's the world-leading laboratory for particle physics. You know, particle physics is the most fundamental of all sciences because it looks at the smallest constituents of matter and the laws of the universe at the most fundamental level. Currently, we are running and operating the Large Hadron Collider, which is the most powerful accelerator ever built. It's a 27-kilometer ring, 100 meters underground. You see the yellow trace in the figure. It's where the Higgs boson was discovered in 2012. These are very special particles, and Andrea mentioned it. I would like to say why it's so special. It's a bit of physics. It's related to the mechanism that allowed matter to the matter we are all made of to form in the early universe millions of a second after the Big Bang, some 13.8 billion years ago. And so without this mechanism and the Higgs boson, we will simply not be here. So the physics is very exciting. But of course, CERN has also has a broader set of values. Actually, it was founded in 1954, so at a crucial turning point in history for Europe and the world, with the dual aim of first bringing back scientific excellence in Europe after the war and fostering a peaceful collaboration between the people and the countries of Europe through science. The 12 European member states who signed the founding convention in 1954 understood that the socio-economic recovery of Europe also requires sustained investment in fundamental research. And second, that science is a glue that can connect people in a fractured continent. And today, CERN is a leader in its field, and is a global laboratory with 25 member states, 10 associate member states, and 4 observers from all over the world, collaboration with about 50 countries from all over the world, and a community of more than 17,500 people from more than 600 university institutions worldwide, representing more than 110 nationalities. If you look at the age distribution of the CERN users, we see that the peak is at 27. So most, our population is essentially young, made of students and young postdocs. And so training is actually part of our core mission. At any given time, CERN and our collaborating institutes are training some 5,500 young people continuously, including physicists, engineers, IT professional, technician, administrative staff, across a wide range of fields. And most of them actually move on to pursue our careers outside particle physics, mainly in industry or other sectors of research or the public sector in general. And so CERN provides society, in particular European society, with a continuous streams of STEM talents. So our physics goals are extremely ambitious. You have seen we try to reproduce, we do reproduce routinely the condition of the early universe as it was just in the first instance of life after the Big Bang. So this requires, of course, extraordinary instruments, extremely complex and cutting-edge technologies in many fields. You see them here that we develop at CERN, from superconducting magnets and materials to cryogenic, vacuum, instrumentation, electronics, robotics, big data, quantum AI, etc. And these technologies have important application to various fields of society, and actually some of them have had a disruptive impact on our everyday life, from the World Wide Web to accelerator to treat cancer and the PET scanner and other medical imaging devices. So let me conclude with this very beautiful image of the sky taken by the James Webb Space Telescope, built by NASA, ESA, and the Canadian Space Agency. When we see images like this one, we are of course all fascinated by the luminous objects, stars, galaxies, etc. But for us particle physicists, like for cosmologists or astronomers, the most intriguing part is the darkness. Today, 95% of the universe is dark to us. It's made of form of matter and energy that we do not see, we do not capture with our instruments, and we do not know, and we call, for this reason, call them dark matter and dark energy. So understanding the dark universe is one of the main frontiers today in fundamental physics in Europe and beyond, and will require unprecedented ideas, unprecedented instruments, unprecedented technologies, and unprecedented collaborations. Thanks.
Thank you. Please. Thank you very much, Fabiola. So it is possible for the EU to put together something like this in a collaborative way with multi-country collaboration involving the private sector, inspiring researchers from all over the world to come over to Europe, and in a way that has immense impact both on the advancement of science and the frontier of science, but also on industrial applications and what we would call today competitiveness. We will bring that into our conversation, of course, as we were discussing now the several goals of European research and innovation policy, which include competitiveness, but also the advancement of science and how this could be done in terms of governance and institutional reforms, right? Before we do that, I will invite our second speaker, good friend of CEPS, a good friend of the European Commission as advisor and a chairwoman of the ESIR group, the advisory group on economic and societal impacts of research that operates within the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission, of which I'm also a proud member. She is, in her daily life, a professor in biological oceanography. Okay, should I mention that you're American? No. She is the leader of the Sustainability Science Center and a researcher for the Center for Macroecology, Evolution and Climate at the University of Copenhagen. She's been involved in advising also the Danish government, and she is involved with the Danish Commission on Climate Change Policy and Danish Climate Council, and so on and so forth. Now, she also worked with the United Nations on the UN Global Sustainable Development Report. She is, the other thing I would like to mention, apart from being seamlessly able to move from the pure science that she deals with to the policy implications. But she champions a systemic approach to research and innovation policy, and she is one of the leading researchers within that limited group that works on a periodic basis on the so-called research on planetary boundaries, right? And how can we use science, but also develop our policies to stay within planetary boundaries to avoid abusing the planet, if you wish. And I don't know if I have other things to say. No, okay. So I would like, we're very happy every time she comes to visit us, and I would like to ask everybody to help me welcome her properly. This is Catherine Richardson.
Thank you very much. And,
no pressure.
What he's trying to say is that I'm actually a very old woman. No, I'm here, actually, I'm going to use my few minutes to argue, we're living in very, very exciting times, but that the landscape around us is changing. And that because the landscape is changing, it means we have to consider some of the words we throw around all the time, things like innovation, competition, that the actual meaning of those words has to change. And I also want to, in this short time, convince you that I think the EU is in a remarkable place to become a leader in this new landscape that we're moving into. You know, an awful lot of people say that policymakers don't listen to science. They don't want to know what science is all about. I honestly don't think that's true. I used to think that every policymaker really did want to base their decisions on knowledge. In recent years, I've come to the conclusion there may be some exceptions, but I still think that most are in that position. And I think we're in a really interesting time right now, because sometimes science, it takes a really long time from when scientific discoveries are made until they really become a part of society and the way society thinks. I mean, think about poor old Galileo. He was imprisoned in 1633 for saying he thought Copernicus was right, and the sun was revolving, or the earth was revolving around the sun and not the other way around. It wasn't until the 1990s that the Catholic Church said, sorry, there may have been some mistakes in the Inquisition. So it can take a long time. Darwin, 1859, you know, most of us who have grown up with the idea of evolution would like to think we would have jumped on his train the moment it left the station. But in fact, it took a really long time. And if you live in Kansas, you still haven't gotten the message that we are organisms just like all others. I think we're in the phase at the moment where we're realizing, oops, I'm having this problem now. Okay, whoop. we're realizing that we're not only organisms, we're part of an ecosystem, just like all other organisms, and we need to respect that ecosystem. And I think that change, this sort of going over to more systemic thinking or realizing that we're a part of a system, started when we got pictures like this in connection with the Apollo missions in the it was actually Christmas Eve 1968 that we got the first picture of the Earth. You've all seen these, so I don't actually need this. I could just say, bring up the picture on your retina there and it'll come to you. Even though we know these pictures, we don't think very often about what they really show. And first of all, it shows that our ancestors made a terrible mistake when they called this planet Earth. It should be called ocean. But the other thing about this picture is the fact that there's no umbilical cord. Now, what does it mean if there's no umbilical cord? It means that once we've used the resources that are here, we're not going to get any more. And when I talk about resources, I'm not just talking about what we use to put into our product. I'm not just talking about lithium that we put in our batteries. I'm talking about the garbage dump that we use for our waste products like CO2. I'm talking about water. I'm talking about a lot of things we don't pay for, and those things can be represented by climate and biodiversity. But I'm also talking about the kinds of resources that we need for our production. And so you can say, no longer can we innovate and just see where it takes us. Oh, I found a tractor. Let's start using it and see what happens. We have to have a vision of where we want to go, and we have to innovate specifically trying to get to that vision. And of course, the vision must be that we can continue to exist within the resource limits that this planet, our ecosystem has. So if we want to know how to do this, we could ask them that have done it. And the interesting thing is, you can ask yourself, how has life survived on Earth for 3.5 billion years without running out of resources? Everything that's needed for life is already on this planet except energy. And you and I aren't smart enough to use that energy directly. We need plants to produce it into something that we can use. And all other animals that can't do photosynthesis themselves need those plants as well. They're also a resource that we need. They're also limited. They keep doing photosynthesis, so it's renewable, but there's a limited amount. So we have to ask ourselves, how did life manage this for 3.5 billion years? Two things. One, with an incredibly efficient use of all the resources that it uses, and by developing a 100% circular resource economy. Now let's have a look at Europe. This is a picture of productivity from 1970 until now in the European Union. The blue line shows our productivity with respect to labor. Now, labor's expensive. Of course, we're getting much more out of labor now than we did in 1970. The orange line shows you emissions. Well, we've managed to make emissions expensive as well, and so we're getting better there. The green line gives you energy. Not quite as good as emissions, but still positive. The blue line gives you productivity with respect to resource use. Completely flat. Nothing has happened in the EU since 1970 in terms of the productivity that we use, and the resources, and now I'm talking about the lithium and that sort of stuff we're putting in. And that is a serious problem because there is no other continent that is as resource poor as Europe. What do you think colonization was all about? Already there, people realized resources were a problem. Why do you think Mr. Trump wants Greenland? So resources are becoming more and more clear, and we have done nothing to increase our resource efficiency. What about circularity? Well, in fact, we're very poor in circularity. 12%, according to the Circularity Gap Report, Europe is 12% circular. That means that 88% of the resources we use, we simply just throw away. There are variations there. The Netherlands are 25%. My own country, Denmark, and I've lived in Denmark longer than I lived in the States. My own country is down at 4%. We think we're so much farther ahead of everyone else on environmental things they can't even see the numbers on the back of us. But in fact, we really are losers when it comes to circularity. So we have a really big job in front of us. But if you look over here, you have revealed patent advantage. The blue is Europe in circular economy technologies. It's not the numbers of patents, but it is our production relative to the global average. And you've got the EU, and then you've got the US in orange, and you've got, I think you've got China and Korea and Japan in that order. And you can see it's built in different periods here, and you can see that it's increasing. Our advantage is increasing, has been increasing over time. Now this was an area, we talk about AI, we talk about how do we use AI to do this job. We have this vision, we have to get there. It's imperative if we want to be leaders in the future, it's imperative that we crack this nut. So, rounding off, my guidelines for EU innovation, which in the long run will lead to competitiveness, maximize resource use efficiency. We haven't done anything in that department. Focus on circularity, which means eliminating waste. And finally, identifying future bottlenecks. And one of the bottlenecks I alluded to earlier is, in fact, biogenic carbon. And biogenic carbon is that which has gone through photosynthesis so that life can use it. We all learned, I think, in the 3rd grade that it's photosynthesis that starts every food web on Earth, except for some chemosynthesis in the very bottom of the ocean. So photosynthesis is the key. We're unique on this planet because we are the only organism that has learned to harness external energy to our own use. So there's no other organism that can transport itself faster than it can run, fly, or swim. We can. And every time we talk about an energy system or an energy crisis, we're talking about that luxury energy. The real crisis is happening around the kind of energy that keeps life alive. And we need to be focusing on that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Catherine. And we will bring this into our conversation later as a set of very, very important thoughts, also on what our priorities should be. And these are, again, priorities for sustainability, for staying within planetary boundaries, but they're also priorities that relate to Europe's competitiveness. You really want to think about that as your key priority. And so, is there a European way to competitiveness that, by the way, en passant, also takes care of the planet and the way in which we use resources and improves on resources? So, I want to move now to our third guest speaker. You've seen him around also in Ideas Lab. Last year, he actually took care of an entire questions lab throughout the whole program of Ideas Lab. This year, we decided to exploit him just a little bit less, not just so a couple of panels and a plenary session is our go-to person whenever we want to talk about how data can be leveraged in the public interest, how data can be governed better, and also on how research questions can be formulated better. It's a visionary thinker that has been coupling collective intelligence with artificial intelligence, has been exploring ways to do this in the future, so that also in the future scientific enterprise we can make the most of both. So the technologies that both Fabiola and Catherine have evoked to be used in the public interest, how to couple this with the wisdom of the collective intelligence, and how we can build through this an enhanced way of tackling the big scientific endeavors of the future. So he has been co-founding one of the most innovative think tanks that have seen the light over the past decades, the New York University GovLab. He's also founded a data tank here in Brussels. He's everything about data, but also much more, as you will see, is our friend and colleague, Stefan Verhulst. Please, Stefan, take the floor. And And no pressure, again.
Thank you very much. And I was already worried that you would share other secrets that I might have shared with you.
Of course, he's a trained ballerino and a pianist.
Exactly, thank you. So always be worried if you share something with Andrea and you get called upon stage, he might actually share some of the things that you might have told him beforehand. And again, delighted to be here, and especially thanks to everyone to still be here. I'm always delighted. Some people say I don't like to talk after lunch. I actually enjoy talking after lunch because then you see the real committed people still showing up. So thanks for being committed. And so yes, I will talk about data. And before I do that, let me first reflect that the last 2 days clearly has made obvious that we are living in a very complex, dynamic and interdependent society, and that ultimately the challenges that we are encountering requires new ideas, which is why the Ideas Lab is a great initiative from my perspective, because we really cannot address today's societal challenges with the toolkit that we had in the past. And so we really need to start thinking about what are the new ideas that will move forward. But not only ideas will make a difference, it's ultimately also breakthrough insights and also better evidence on what works and what does not work. And that means that science becomes even ever more important in how we're going to go addressing societal challenges, but also planetary challenges, as was expressed as well. Now, good science depends on good data. And that obviously might be clear for everyone, but if we are also trying to change the scientific enterprise by leveraging AI and other technologies in new ways, then we will even need more data than ever before, because ultimately AI, especially in the context of science, depends on data sets that are high quality, quite often voluminous, and also have particular kind of characteristics that can be leveraged now using those new analytical and machine learning techniques as well. Now, unfortunately, I would say, we live in a data age, which basically means that digitalization, and we didn't anticipate that when we were talking about digitalization X amount of years ago. I still remember being on stage, and digitalization was all about automation, but ultimately, digitalization, the biggest impact of digitalization is datafication, meaning that every transaction that we undertake with a digital device or in digital means leaves a data trail. And so we have massive amount of new data sources, both in terms, as I said, in volume, but also in velocity, veracity, but also variety. So each time when you go to a store and you use a digital credit card, then you have a data trail. When you go use a bike, a city bike, there's a data trail. And so we have a lot more data than we ever had before that really can inform science, and especially social science, in new ways that we never had before. We just finished a study for the Wellcome Trust where we looked into how can we harness non-traditional data, such as cell phone data, data from wearables, and other kinds of data for health and well-being research. And we showed that, anyway, at a minimum, 51 new data sources can now be used to generate better insights about socioeconomic drivers of health, better insights about what health interventions work. And so we have this huge opportunity to actually start leveraging new data sources that we have been generating as a result of digitalization. There's only one problem, and that problem is access to data. I mean, we have massive amount of data that, by the way, because it is digital, we can reuse for other purposes than initially collected, right? Which is the other big characteristics of digital data, is that it actually can be reused. But unfortunately, as a society, we have not figured out how to provide access to the data that is already collected. I call this, by the way, circular data systems, which is about data that is already generated. How can we start using it to improve actually society as well? Now, the European Union has tried to address the access problem. So we have open data, we have open government data, we have the Open Science Cloud, that European Open Science Cloud that tries to advance open science data. We have, of course, data spaces that are now being promoted. We have the Data Act, we have the Data Governance Act, We have Article 40 of the DSA that tries to provide access to platform data for research and so on. So we have a lot of initiatives that try to address those, tries to address the critical issue of access to data. Unfortunately, and that's where I have to bring the bad news, we are actually backsliding. And from my point of view, in the current environment, we are entering what I have called a data winter. We are in an AI summer, but we're actually entering a data winter where access to data is rapidly declining. We see access to private sector data, including platform data, such as Meta, X, and so on. In the past, you could actually access some of that data. That is gone. Open government data, OECD just recently published a report, is either stagnating or declining as well. We see data, so even scientific data, especially where I'm also based in the US, for instance, disappearing overnight. We have data that was generated by scientists is now also becoming more and more proprietary, interesting, because some can actually make money from selling science data that typically was open as well, and also at the level of even policies. For instance, the digital omnibus, the policies that were meant to open data are now also so-called simplifying, which basically means narrowing, and so we have less access to data. And then lastly, what we're also seeing is this kind of Gen AI anxiety by data holders, because what we have seen is that open data was great, but it also has been weaponized by those that are using data for AI training without a return on the data that has been made open. And this kind of weaponization of openness has made many data holders nervous, and as a result, we see actually a closing of data sources, including a closing of the public web. A recent study showed that in the past, you could actually, access many things on the web. Now we have seen a decline of 3,000% according to a recent study of what is actually open on the web. So we have this data winter, and I would argue that this will, of course, have impact on science, but it also will have an impact on the AI summer, because without actually tackling the data winter, we won't have an AI summer for very long, because, and in the US, and the reason why they invest in data centers is because they think that they can prevent the data winter or deal with the data winter by investing in compute, but it turns out compute can only deal with kind of the current scarcity of data, for instance, to a certain extent. So what do? I have 7 minutes. I'm already probably over. So I'm only going to raise 3 issues. One issue that might not be obvious, because typically you would start, we need technical infrastructure, and I think we do need technical infrastructure, but I'm not going to focus on the technical infrastructure that we need. First of all, we need to actually strengthen the demand for data. Too often, I've been on many panels, and they always say, we need data, we need data. And I say, I get it, and I'm totally aligned, but what's the question? And it turns out that we are answer-rich, but question-poor quite often in society. We're really not smart or sophisticated when it comes to really formulating what are the real questions that might matter. And that does not mean that we should not have curiosity-driven research, but in order to really unlock data, we really have to make a stronger case. What are the questions that matter, that if answered, we would make a breakthrough or a difference? And then what is the data that we need so that we have a bigger and stronger demand for the data that is currently residing? I developed something called the 100 Questions Initiative, and we worked with CEPS on what are kind of the 100 Questions Initiative that would make a difference. And I would argue it would be great for Europe to have a 100 Questions initiative, so that you know how to then galvanize both funding and you have a better demand for the data that is needed to start addressing the 100 questions that would make a difference in Europeans' science and in European citizens' lives as well. Secondly, because we are talking about data reuse, we also need to start innovating in kind of policies, by which I mean is that if you reuse data from one purpose to another purpose, then data governance, frankly, collapses. Because in Europe and in other parts of the world, it's all based upon consent. and you can only consent for the purpose for which the data was collected. And so this whole opportunity of data reuse is kind of stifled for good reasons, but is kind of limited because we have not innovated in how do we complement consent in a way that actually benefits also research. And it does not mean that we should get rid of consent, but we need to actually complement it with what I have called a social license. We need to actually have a better understanding on what society feels is appropriate for data to be reused, and also then have ways to enforce that social license. And one way to enforce it is, for instance, by setting up what we have worked on, data commons, so that you have a data commons that provides access to data in alignment with expectations and preferences that have been expressed. And then the last element I would argue is that we also need to invest in the human infrastructure. There's a lot of investment in data spaces, technical infrastructure, but who is going to run a data space, and what are the competencies to actually make data accessible, make data available to a large extent, and that is kind of totally ignored. I mean, we have data scientists, but we don't have data stewards that really enables access to data in the way that can be reused in a more systematic, sustainable, and responsible way. And so I would argue, yes, we need new policies, but we also need new professions, such as data stewards, that have been recognized as kind of a critical infrastructure to really provide us access to data, because without access to data, the darkness that Fabiola has shown might be darkness for a long time, not only when we look up, but also with regard to darkness with how society works and how we can improve. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Stefan. And again, the way in which this plays out with the topics that Fabiola and Catherine have illustrated is essential. Also, you know, what's the use of data and also the production of data from, for example, from CERN onto the rest of society, and how can this leverage further innovation going forward. The same is the data that we need also to tackle the big challenges for sustainability and the circularity in our planet. And time to move to our fourth speaker. I'm afraid I don't know if I have things that I can reveal about him. Probably nothing, I better not in any case. So no ballerina, no piano, no other things. But he certainly has been, after a career that has been, are you? No. You want to share?
I have something.
You have something?
Yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
His great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather took a bullet but he took it for the Danes.
For the Danes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So you can give more details if you want this to take the floor.
Which is why his name is Christian.
Exactly. So his name is Christian. Is for many years now the go-to person in the European Parliament, the go-to member of the European Parliament when it comes to science, when it comes to research and innovation, and when it comes to industrial policy and competitiveness. So for people like me that have been around for a long time in Brussels, he's not like a newcomer, but he's been just as much of a stakeholder and a key player as a few others have been in this town. So for us, since he now is involved in a big challenge, that of being rapporteur for both Horizon Europe and the Competitiveness Fund, it is a great honor and a pleasure to listen to how he sees things. He's also the chair of STOA inside the European Parliament, which is a very important institution linked to the European Parliamentary Research Service that really looks at science and potential uses of science in the future. It does foresight and so on and so forth. So it is a great compliment to the inputs that we've received until now. Would like to invite him to the floor. Christian Ehler, member of the European Parliament. Thanks a lot for being with us at Ideas Lab.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. When I left the office, and I thought, to some extent, also being a stand-in for the European Commission, who couldn't be present today. I mean, it's in the end of that interesting opening of the discussion. I mean, I'm intellectually, I mean, politically manage easily that. Could be intellectually a little bit the party pooper. That's an easy exercise for politicians, actually. I mean, if we are looking to the setting of where we are, we're in challenging times. 15 years ago, I will remember that for the fourth time, the rapporteur for the Parliament for Horizon, the strategic partners of Europe were the United States, Russia, and China. It had been labeled like that. So in a way, if we look to the global role of science, you have to somehow set that into a context of what geopolitically happens. So somewhere on the way, at least two of them got lost, and for the third one, we are not so quite sure, if I look to recent developments on the other side of the Atlantic. So I think we have to understand that we are in a different kind of setting. On the other hand, admittibly, this idea of the peace dividend, this idea that in the beginning of the 21st century, that things or the global quests for research would somehow change, is somehow also gone. Because, I mean, we all remember that in the times of the Cold War, or if I look to the questionable history of Germany in the beginning of the 20th century, I mean, science, a kind of global cooperation, global ambitions, a kind of ethic, common understanding had been attacked, had been shattered, had been at times simply no longer existing. And so we should be aware in what context we are living. The question for Europe is simply, I mean, I hear in these days a lot of talks about now Europe can exemplify academic freedom, would be somehow the safe haven for world science and things like that. Yes, but recent court decisions on universities in East European countries might also show in a certain other direction. So it's not that the setting in Europe is that kind of ideal paradise which is now attractive for the rest of the world. But we should understand, and that might be my starting point on a discussion for the next framework program, which is actually the biggest civilian framework program in the world, should be not just looking to science, it should be looking to basics. And if I recall the last point of the negotiations, when we ended the negotiations on the last framework program, was the divide between the Council and the Parliament on one recital, and that linked the biggest civilian research program in the world to academic freedom. And Council said no, because there was no unanimous vote in the Council in order to agree with the Parliament on that. And we talk about a recital, so for connoisseurs, that's the mildest reference you can find in a regulation. So we should be aware that whatever we want to do, we have to lay the foundation in Europe itself. So we have a substantial discussion about academic freedom in Europe. I think that the second dimension might be also just indirectly reflected to science, but is reflected in terms of what tells science to society. And this might be, at first glance, a pretty obvious discussion. But if we are looking to the recent developments and specifically to the COVID crisis, we have learned that, yeah, we somehow got trapped because we thought the dialectic way of discussing science is somehow reflected of the dialectic way in our societies, which is reflecting by the media, let's say, any kind of content. So you had during COVID, which could have been the crown jewel moment of European or global science, actually we did everything right. I mean, since the peak, I mean, it was nothing so impressive. What science had been contributing to society, we somehow messed it up. And that is because there is a lack of understanding in science that the dialectic nature of a discussion in science is seems to be just reflected by the dialectic media coverage of media or societal discussion. Because the dialectic nature of science discussion is to have a thesis and antithesis and then come to a synthesis, and you would reflect any kind of minority position because it could contribute then to the synthesis. That doesn't reflect the dialectic nature of the discussion in our society, because in an attention-seeking society, the dialectic nature of things is to have a position and a counterposition, and by that create tensions, and by tensions, attraction. And when I saw the discussion on COVID, where we had representatives from the science area representing the majority school of thought, and then hidden behind a professorship title of an obscure university, there was someone on TV Premier saying, "Oh, that might be interesting, but I think rubbing hands and not breathing anymore might be the better solution to prevent COVID." You know, we saw two professors in the media, and then we saw exactly that the opposite happened, what would happen on an ordinary good science conference, that this dialectic discussion would lead to a synthesis and then a majority of thought and then the development, of science, but also of society. Whereas the result of the COVID discussion had been practically the opposite. So we have to understand, before we talk about science programs and things like that, we have to lay the foundation for the role of science in our societies in the 21st century. And it's not given. Brings me to the third point. Since the time of the Enlightenment, the enlightened princeps, if there had been granting generously some kind of funding to science for the well-being of whatever. Sometimes it was its individual curiosity, sometimes it was, yes, in the context of the times of enlightenment, but democracy had been taken over that principle to some extent. So democracy, not quite controversial as arbitrary allocation processes usually are in politics or society, had been granting to the sector means never enough, but always for sure. This principle is no longer working. We had to learn that, and it's no longer working for different reasons. It's no longer working for ideological reasons, because ideology is driving cuts, budget cuts, because we simply don't want that. That's what we see in the United States. But we see also in our democracies that this kind of reputation, which somehow had been given and was in politics reflected by an almost non-controversial allocation process, is no longer working. We had the European Council and a program decided, presented by the Commission, about 130 billion euros. In the afternoon, in the Council, before dinner of the heads of states, the German Chancellor, really, Mrs. Merkel was representing a very, let's say, science-affine generation of politicians, said this is a done deal. After dinner, we had been cut to 82 billion. We lost practically 1/3 of the budget, because the budget process is as arbitrary you could imagine. So in a way, the privilege of the academia to complain rightly not to get enough money, but be reassured that there would be any money, is no longer working. This intellectual moral superiority could be the intellectual moral superiority of the victim. So, but science is not used to that, because science avoids to be too political, and for good reason. On the other hand, it's no longer given that in the societal or political allocation process, the old mechanisms are going to work. And so before we come to these discussions on the role of a parliament, the three institutions, the most likely biggest civilian science program in the world, we should be well aware that we have to reassure us about the foundations of that whole discussion in our society. Last sentence to the positive news. Within this arbitrary process, the Commission was able to manage for the first time to raise the budget up to, in its proposal, to 175 billion. Is that enough? No, it's the old scheme, never enough. But it's amazing what happened, actually, that the Commission was really willing to take the battle, and Ursula von der Leyen was willing to take the battle to take away money from, in the highly arbitrary process, from spending programs to investment programs. But then yet again becomes the downside of that. Because right now we are in midst of a relatively simplistic discussion which wants to connect competitiveness to research. And that's manifold, and then I'm going to stop. For manifold reasons, it's a very problematic. Simply, it's relatively simplistic, specifically if you see that we haven't even defined what is competition. As Professor Richardson had been saying, I mean, you could define competition as productivity, that you would have at least a definition, and then from there it could derive a certain agenda. But even within that, if you would focus on that angle, the question is it productivity in terms of consuming or productivity in terms of not so much consuming resources? So in a way, the definitions are so blurry that the interlink, this simplistic idea of a seamless investment journey and all that kind of myths which are being brought forward by the Commission, but also in the general discussion, are highly problematic. Last aspect, let's be also realistic, and that's not to the sympathy of all of the room. Europe is trapped in mid-tech, in a mid-tech dilemma, not because Mr. Aguillon tells us, it's simply the reality. We had been very much focusing on the Green Deal, to some extent rightly so, but on the digital sector we had been dramatically losing. So in a way, the question is, if you establish the logic that somehow, although you get a bigger budget, you have to be instrumental for something which is hardly well defined, would that in effect, in a world where now European business umbrella organizations sing the same tune on this abstract level, saying, okay, we should decide along competitiveness a little bit on the research agenda, is that going to work? Or does it mean that incumbent industries are locking us into a research agenda which is highly questionable, highly problematic for the European economy, for a moment being a poor economist? So what I'm just saying is, on the one hand, I think we are in an arbitrary process where Europe goes against the trend. If I see what happens in the United States in terms of cuts, if I see the general trend of an arbitrary and very problematic situation for allocating money to research, I think Europe goes forward. On the other hand, we have to be very, very careful that this kind of simplistic kind of interlink between whatever kind of political ambitions and research agendas are not guiding us in a very problematic direction. And having said that, the last issue is, I think, more instrumental, or from a methodological point of view. Anyway, we are too slow. And that is the role, and that's my last sentence of the Parliament. We are going to be the pacemaker. You see that we are, from a methodological point of view, will redesign the proposal, or the non-existing proposal, I have to say, in terms of the second pillar of the Commission. We are going to go for APA model, for quicker models. We want the public sector, the public institutions, the political institutions to step back a certain way, to prioritize, but then leave it to a much more clever, faster management. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much, Christian. We have yet one other input into our conversation, which is a video that was sent to us by Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, who's the Director General of the WHO, who pushes us yet a little bit more in the direction of science and research and innovation. So please play the video. It's a short video, and then we enter into our conversation.
Dear colleagues and friends, we're living through a period of profound transition for science and the multilateral system. Geopolitical tensions, declining trust in institutions, and pressures for scientific self-reliance are reshaping how knowledge is produced, shared, and applied. Yet, the challenges we face, pandemics, antimicrobial resistance, climate change, aging populations, do not respect borders. No single nation, however advanced, can innovate its way out of these challenges alone. Science is at the heart of WHO's work. Evidence, research, and innovation guide everything we do, from setting global norms to supporting countries in turning discovery into impact. Today, we're seeking to harness the full power of WHO's global network of more than 800 collaborating centers, linking leading universities, research institutes, and laboratories across every region to accelerate research, development, and innovation for public health. Tools, including artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and synthetic biology, offer extraordinary promise for health. These tools can transform discovery and care, but only if guided by strong public institutions, ethical governance, and international collaboration. Europe has a unique opportunity to lead in this next era of scientific discovery, not only by competing, but by convening, not only by innovating, but by stewarding science as a global public good. At a moment when multilateralism is under strain, scientific collaboration remains one of our strongest bridges. Science can turn shared knowledge into shared security and uncertainty into a healthier, safer future for all. I thank you.
To Dr. Tedros. So let's enter into the conversation with the speakers. You heard also Christian Ehler sending a pretty strong message, but also a message of caution, right? And how the world is rapidly changing. I'm looking at Fabiola. You actually sit on a fairly international collaboration, which is intergovernmental with an outer layer of private sector and the attraction of scientists from all over the world. Do you feel the pressure of the changing environment on you, the geopolitical environment, the reduction in the scope for scientific collaboration, teach something to other parts of science in that respect?
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, the pressure is there.
Yes. Yeah.
The pressure is there, of course, and you see it in the need of justifying the work of fundamental research institutions like CERN more and more in terms of impact on society, immediate impact on society. And of course, I believe that the fundamental research and the progress of knowledge per se is absolutely crucial for the future of humanity, and it's justified per se by the intrinsic value. But it's also true there is pressure, financial pressure, there is competition for resources, and so it's more and more important to show what also organizations like CERN and many others can, the impact they can have, the benefit to society, and I showed a few examples. But I agree with Tedros. I think at a time where there is a tendency to, to reduce trust in multilateralism, collaboration, openness, etc., we have to resist. Science is one of the few means we have today to connect people in our fractured world, because science is universal. The laws of nature are the same everywhere. An apple falls in the same way in this room, in China, in Italy, etc. But also is unifying because the wish to understand how things work is intrinsic to the human nature. So science has no passport, no ethnicity, no political party, no religion, and is one of the few things still that can connect our fractured world. So we should really resist. And also because collaboration is essential for the progress of science. Science progresses more quickly and better if scientists share their data, their knowledge, their conclusion, their expertise, their competencies. Collaboration and openness are also very important to spread the benefits of science and therefore reduce knowledge-based inequity across society, because of course today's, increasing gap between the poor and the rich, the developed and the countries under development, etc., is widening, and therefore society is not really sustainable.
Thanks, Fabiola. In terms of attraction of talent and involvement of countries all over the world, there's a lot of discussion at the moment on how low and middle income countries, but also other countries there are many that are associating themselves to Horizon Europe. They can be attracted to Europe, although
Absolutely.
we at CEPS have done research also on the advantage of developing scientific collaborations with centers outside of Europe. But CERN is perhaps a good example of how a researcher, in addition to salary conditions, working conditions in the ecosystem, perhaps needs also a sense of purpose or an inspiring challenge, right? To be attracted to a European center.
So first of all, people, scientists go, in particular the young people go where the best science is done. So in order to attract people, you have to run the best, the most compelling, the most ambitious, the boldest project. That's the first thing. But as you say correctly so, there are values. Institutions like CERN and many others in Europe are not only scientific excellence, they are also value system, values of collaboration, values of diversity, of inclusion, open science, of freedom, of educate, the importance of education and the importance of not leaving low-income countries behind, but the 50 collaboration agreements CERN has with countries from all over the world, most of them are low-income countries, and there our mission is capacity building. So that's the spirit of being inclusive and also being, helping everyone on the planet to, benefit from science, knowledge, education, technology.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Fabiola. We should turn to Catherine because Christian said something about resource efficiency as part of competitiveness or productivity, right? We've fought that battle a little bit in the past edition of ASEER. How do you think, how hopeful are you that this more systemic approach to competitiveness can be taken up over the coming years in the EU?
I'm convinced it will be taken up. This is a journey that we're on, and it's coming slowly but surely. I'm not sure it will penetrate entirely through the EU in the coming years, but or in the immediate years. But I'm sure we're on our way there. Mm-hmm. And I think science shows us that we have to. And I also think we should. I mean, I really was very impressed by some of the things that you said, Christian, and also about the using the COVID as an example, because we have this thing, the best scientists. It's all about individuals. And yet science it's a competition, but it's also a communal sport. It's a communal sport that's developed its own checks and balances. That's why we have a peer review system, and it goes in and it controls it. It controls itself. And one of our problems when we meet data and journalism and the sort of, we take out individuals and set them against each other, and you lose the communality of the whole process. And I think we have to think that into this system as well. We did I think our legacy report from the last period in ASEER was a paper where we said, okay, nobody knows exactly how you get the right policy to go where we need to go, but we'll play a game of acupuncture. We have a system here. It's a complex adaptive system, our socioeconomic system, that where we want innovation, we want some kind of growth. We can define it as we will, or competitiveness, or whatever. But we went in and we found 10 pressure points where we said you have to work on all of these together. It's not good enough to sit and say, okay, we're going to make a policy for X, and that'll make tons of money flow to the EU through research, and we will. I mean, there are things that are bound together, and I think more and more people are understanding that, Andrea, and maybe not all of the decision makers at this point, but I think we're working in the right direction. I'm optimistic.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And to Stefan, there have been provisions, there have been attempts, right? Yesterday we had a panel on the Apply AI strategy of the EU, which again seems to place quite a lot of bets on the data spaces that will work. I mean, you've been an advisor to the Commission also in the past on the Data Governance Act and Data Act in the Business to Government data sharing. how do you think we can make it work this time, let's say? Because I think there have been many attempts to use data properly, and also there is countless opportunities for public institutions today to use data. Diane Cole this morning was talking about statisticians and the fact that they actually are being penalized at the moment, and so that we don't make the most of the data that we have. So I'll perhaps start already asking you a question that I would ask others, but if you had a magic wand, would there's anything that you would do to make it happen that we are not doing at the moment?
Well, first of all, I mean, there are many issues, right, that we need to consider, and quite often, anyway, we start with the supply, and forget that, anyway, if you don't have a demand that can be matched with the supply, then you're always going to have a harder time to actually get anyone to use the supply or to support the supply. And so that's what I've been advocating for, is that yes, we need to focus on the supply, but also make sure that we have a clear understanding of the demand, and that we have a process to specify demand in ways that is more participatory than has been till today, right? I mean, if you think about research agendas, or what are the kind of the priority questions that society focuses on and funds, I mean, you mentioned it's an arbitrary kind of funding. I would almost argue is that it's kind of an arbitrary way of setting research priorities as well. And so we need to really start thinking more about how do we go about setting the demand, how do we do it in a participatory way that actually buys in also the understanding that this is actually what we want to know, for instance, and even anyway, having kind of stimulate curiosity, not by saying this is what we're going to research, but saying how would we go about researching and bring the audience to the table? Because to a large extent, I think there's a lot, including in statistical offices quite often lose the trust, because first of all, the questions that statistical offices seek to answer don't always correspond with what people actually want to know. And more importantly, statistical officers always say, this is the average. And surprise, surprise, no one here in the audience feels like you're an average. and so we have lost this connection between kind of the public, how do we formulate the demand for research, and how do we then provide answers that actually also people feel like, oh, that I can relate to that. And I think that's kind of, and that relates also with data spaces, is that it feels like there's a lot of focus on creating a supply for a data space, but what are the questions? And how do we then make sure that we have the data that can start answering those questions, right?
Thank you very much, Stefan. And I go to Christian. I'm not going to ask you what would you do if you had the magic wand, because you have the magic wand. No, of course it's not a magic wand. But I want to ask you a little bit of question about expertise in sourcing ideas and bringing them into fruition, right? We see how specialized centers can do this by leaving the decision to scientists and selecting priorities in curiosity-driven research. When it comes to innovation, you really need to have that expertise in program management that speeds up what in some parts of the Commission is called the investment journey, and in other parts it's called the innovation to investment journey. And how do you see this happening? Because this is one of the key problems in the way in which the current system works in translating the results of excellent research into innovation. Is there anything that you plan to do or to propose, of course, over the coming months in that respect?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you will see a fairly radical proposal. We listen carefully to Manuel Heiter and his group, and you're going to see that the Parliament is going to place a revolutionary proposal. We're going to say it's more or less working programs are meant that the Commission and the Council or the Member States set priorities, have a discussion on the allocation of means, but we don't believe that public institutions or public research institutions are any longer in a micromanageable way to run complexity. Neither in terms of the time to grant or whatever we would call that, nor in terms of the given complexity. And so in a way the Parliament is going to propose, I don't like the reference to the DARPA or ARPA model, But I think that we carefully had been listening to Professor Heitor. We will propose 2 councils, selecting then expert groups, running budgets for a given time, an overriding right for the council and for the commission on that. But to some extent, we have to give back the authority also to the stakeholders. But that comes with a lot of responsibility. And, you know, I often hear all these pleas that we want to have to say more, it's too abstract, you have co-creation by different DGs, we have broad programs, they're either too specific or not specific enough. But then, when I was asking on conferences, okay, what type of model do you would like to run? You know, then we get abstract references to DARPA. I know DARPA, I'd been working in the Appropriation Committee in the United States Senate. So DARPA is a wild creature with a money beneficiary. Much more difficult to do that with science programs. But that means also responsibility, because as I said, it's very unpolite, I have to admit, but I'm German, you know, we are that by nature. But, you know, this moral superiority of the victim, having said it's not fit for purpose, takes too long, too abstract, not to the point, means also responsibility, because I mean most of the professors I know, and I'm coming from biotechnology, are not interested in managing programs. That's a challenge that the scientifically best are willing to do managerial skills. I mean, they would like to get more money simply. So in a way, you're going to see that it's a fairly radical proposal the Parliament is putting on the table. By the way, the only proposal, because 100 billion of this program is a blank sheet so far.
Thank you very much, Christian. So it's open-ended, conclusion of this panel. I wanted to really give the opportunity to all our 4 speakers to express themselves, and so sorry that there's not going to be time for questions and answers in this panel. But we see that, first of all, the example of CERN could shine a bit into many other intergovernmental or EU-funded or international research centers. There are a few others, as Fabia was saying. So that is important for the attraction of talent, for the leveraging of resources, for the mobilization of new tools, new technologies into what is fundamentally seeking answers to the right questions. And Stefan is reminding us the need to leverage data to also socialize and democratize more research and innovation going forward, and enabling governments to give answers to the important questions of today that become increasingly complex, to take a systemic approach in all this and continue fighting the battle. And so we're so thankful for Catherine to continue taking the flag and continuing fighting the battle of complexity and systemic approaches to research and innovation. And to do this by leveraging expertise, by giving back the words to the ones that have deep experience in the field, and leveraging all the resources, public, private, philanthropic, to really embark into an adventure and an endeavor that becomes as more important and far-reaching for us as other parts of the world consider that to be unnecessary or even dangerous ideologically. So that is very important for us. As a conclusion of the official program of Ideas Lab, we wanted to leave you with this message. We continue to believe in this. The people here in the panel, in their own fields and turfs, continue fighting this battle, this intellectual battle. It is also our battle at CEPS. And so we leave you with that positive message. There is a lot that we can do to fight it successfully. Thank you very much. That said, I will invite our panelists to go down the stage, and for a final word of wrap-up to our program, as we go into the after hours, I'll invite our CEO, Carol Lanu.
So thank you, Andrea. Fantastic session to end this at least official part of our Ideas Lab. We still have a few sessions upstairs, but which are